Challenging Conventions, Characterization Through Dress in Brandon Sanderson's Stormlight Archive. In the realm of fiction, the epic fantasy is a niche genre that rarely gains notoriety among mainstream readers. Usually lumped in with science fiction and often overlooked as a genre for nerds and geeks, such work is rarely studied or analyzed academically in the way, for example, Dickens, Twain, or Joyce have been. Some authors who have received extensive study are J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, and most recently, George R.R. Martin. But there are huge gaps in the analysis and study of fantasy novels, particularly in the area of cultural studies. However, fiction in general receives attention from scholars and theorists as important source material for period research and social commentary. As seen in Eileen Ribeiro's Fashion and Fiction, their novels are studied for their historical relevance, information on contemporary dress. Alternatively, in novels may be studied for its symbolic contributions. One example of its use is foreshadowing. There's a strong basis for this type of analysis. As Tom Wolfe states, novelists have been drawn to fashion as an essential ingredient of realistic narration. This was out of sheer instinct and not theory. Early in the game, they seem to sense that fashion is a code, a symbolic vocabulary that offers a sub-rational but instant and very brilliant illumination of the characters of individuals and even periods, especially periods of great turmoil, end quote. But often these analyses rely heavily on the fact that the world in the novel is much like our own, allowing readers to reach conclusions because of their own experiences. Much of dress analysis and scholarly work relies on the similarity of fictional depictions of the world compared to the contemporary world. Fantasy novels do not easily lend themselves to such direct comparison. Although Sanderson has only been professionally writing since 2005, he has published 19 full-length novels, alongside a number of novellas, novelettes, short stories, and even a graphic novel series. He gained prominence when he was chosen to finish Robert Jordan's immense Wheel of Time series after Jordan's death in 2007. Sanderson worked closely with Jordan's widow and editor on the final 3 books, gaining renown in the fantasy world after the 3 novels reached #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. This also increased the popularity of his own novels. Not surprisingly, considering Sanderson's short time as a published author and his recent rise to fame and popularity, very little has been written about his novels aside from some blogs and newspaper book reviews. Despite the lack of critical scholarship, Sanderson's openness with the public about his writing process and perspective as an author allows conclusions to be drawn about the use and significance of dress in his novels. Dress in Sanderson's novels is used in establishing cultural boundaries, social hierarchies, and gender hierarchies, and functions as an important feature of characterization. This is never more apparent than in his ongoing epic fantasy series, The Stormlight Archive. Despite the inherent analytical challenges novels pose, dress can still be viewed as a fabrication of an identity. Many theorists, such as Anne Hollander, Elizabeth Wilson, and Joanne Finkelstein, assert that dress can be used to construct an identity and signify the belonging to or rejection of certain groups or cultures. Going a step further, some theorists, such as Irving Goffman, believe that dress is a type of performance, where one uses clothing as an element of social performance and presentation. Elizabeth Wilson states that dress satisfies, quote, a number of social, aesthetic, and psychological functions. Indeed, it knots them together and can express all simultaneously, end quote, which can be clearly seen in the characterization and experience of the 2 primary characters in the Stormlight Archive, Yasna and Shalon, who engage in the performance of self throughout the series. While the aforementioned theorists generally focused on real-world uses of dress, fiction emphasizes the intentional construction of dress and can be analyzed much in the same way that costume in film and theater can be analyzed. Because fiction is a product of intentional and conscious choices, every element can be assumed to be important. Claire Hughes and Cynthia G. Kuhn approached the use of dress in writings by Henry James and Margaret Atwood, respectively, as a function within the novel itself. And this is the approach used in this analysis. Hughes looks at the historical novels of Henry James and analyzes the use of dress as a method for reinforcing thematic and symbolic patterns in his books. Kuhn examines self-fashioning in Margaret Atwood's novels and the role of women and fashion from a feminist perspective. Both scholars focus on one author's use of dress throughout their career as a meaningful element in their books, instead of trying to glean relevant contemporary social information from the novels. Yasna is Shallan's educator and the sister of Alethkar's king. Alethkar is a militaristic and heavily gender-segregated nation. Alethi men are expected to be warriors, going so far as to ban men from reading and writing altogether, while women are meant to be scholars, scribes, and artists. It is a society which uses wealth and military as a means of spreading their superior culture and dogmatic Vorin religion. Yasna relies on the high-class expectations of women by playing into the role physically in order to more effectively navigate social interactions in order to further her scholarly research. This, despite openly disagreeing with the religious establishment and being branded a heretic. She intentionally manipulates her image and shields herself with a carefully managed identity in order to thrive in her situation. For Yasna, dress is, quote, the cultural metaphor for the body, the material with which we write or draw, a representation of the body in our cultural context, end quote. Joan Eicher and Barbara Sumberg write in The World, Fashion, Ethnic, and National Dress, quote, in a world of shifting identities, dress often indicates an aspect of identity for both group exclusion and inclusion are made apparent through the process of modifying and supplementing the body, end quote. This intentional manipulation of image and persona has a profound effect on her ward, Shallan, who uses Yasna as the basis of her own persona performance later on in the series. Yasna is a self-declared heretic, uninterested in the doctrine of the Vorin Church. Despite her lack of enthusiasm for the religious practices, she does see the advantages of adhering to cultural custom in order to navigate relationships or political maneuvering. She's described as, quote, irreproachable in her appearance, the epitome of Alethi noble dress. Her first appearance in the novel is described from Shallan's perspective as such, quote, she was tall and slender with clear skin, narrow black eyebrows, and thick, deep onyx hair. She wore a part of it wrapped up around a small scroll-shaped gold ornament with 2 long hairpins holding it in place. The rest tumbled down behind her neck in small, tight curls. Even twisted and curled as it was, it came down to Yasna's shoulders. She had a squarish face and discriminating pale violet eyes. This woman was the sister of a king, reserved, statuesque, dressed immaculately in blue and silver. Like Shallan's dress, Yasna's buttoned up the sides and had a high collar, though Yasna had a much fuller chest than Shallan. The skirts were loose below the waist, falling generously to the floor. Her sleeves were long and stately, and the left one was buttoned up to hide her safe hand. End quote. In contrast to her branding as a heretic, every aspect of Yasna's appearance conforms to the ideal of a perfect and pious Alethi noblewoman, especially in donning a sleeve and covering her safe hand. The safe hand is a specifically female requirement where Vorin women are expected to keep their left hand covered at all times. The right hand and dominant hand is considered their free hand and may be left uncovered. The only exceptions are female ardents, women who have devoted their lives to the Vorin Church, and sex workers. The modesty of the safe hand mirrors the social standing of the wearer, as well as being an indicator of the religious traditions and cultural evolution of her nation. Highly ranked women are further constrained by the expectations of covering their safe hand with a sleeve instead of a more convenient glove. Sanderson poses the tension between the glove and the sleeve, not as a matter of fashion, but a matter of class and expectation. Sanderson uses Shallan to explain the tensions between the upper and lower classes. Quote, like all Vorin women, she kept her left hand, her safe hand, covered, exposing only her free hand. Common dark-eyed women would wear a glove, but a woman of her rank was expected to show more modesty than that. In her case, she kept her safe hand covered by an oversized cuff of her left sleeve, of which was buttoned closed. Despite the safe hand being innately restrictive, like most of Lethian Vorin conventions, women in an act of subversion often turn their safe hand into a functional object, either physically through hidden pockets or socially through the manipulation of contact and exposure. While the semiotics of dress can signify elements of the wearer has control over her body and can literally signal emotion or relationship through her safe hand. In The Way of Kings, Shalon encounters an annoyed Yasna who, quote, looked straight at her and then lowered her safe hand to her side in a mark of frustration. Through her flawless appearance and comprehensive understanding of social conventions, Yasna subverts and manipulates cultural codes to further her own cause. First, to gain access to people and documents that no religious heretic would normally be allowed to access, and then later to become the queen of all of Elefkar and unite the nations together. While Yasna is limited by her own form and that which she adorns her body, Shalon is able to create an entirely new physical image. Shalon is one of the few characters that possess supernatural powers. She is able to create illusions, including illusions that allow her to change her physical form visually, an ability called light weaving. Gary Watts states, quote, "We obey the power of dress when others wear it, and we obey it when we wear it ourselves," end quote. Watt believes that as one dresses themselves and chooses what to wear, their choice then affects how they feel and act. If someone is dressed as a superior or authority figure, others are more likely to follow them, even if their authority stretches no further than the ensemble they chose to wear. Shalon utilizes this in two major ways. First, by portraying an image of a respectable and commanding noblewoman, quote, the woman she glimpsed in one breastplate looked too tall, too stately to be Shalon herself. Instead of tangled hair, she had flowing red locks. Instead of refugee rags, she wore a gown woven with golden embroidery. She had not been wearing a necklace before, and when she raised her hand towards the leader of the band, her chipped fingernails appeared perfectly manicured, end quote. Her image allows her to garner the support of defected Alethi soldiers and to act as a personal guard on the Shattered Plains, an area of Alefkar that is under huge military strife. This action saves her life, and she has such a great effect on them that she wins the Sawyer's loyalty indefinitely. Despite Shalon only subtly manipulating her image, and just for a moment, her return to her unmanipulated form is noticed, and Shalon, now lacking her powerful persona, has to work extra hard to maintain the loyalty of her newfound army. Quote, Vance took her arm, pulling her to a stop, his grip firmed, even painful. "You don't look like you did before," he said. She hadn't realized how much he towered over her. "Did my eyes mistake me? I saw a queen in the darkness, and now I see a child." "Perhaps you saw what your conscience needed you to see," Shalon said. The second is her creating the persona of a con woman named Vale in order to infiltrate a secret order, the Ghost Bloods, and discover their connection to deaths and betrayals of people in her life. Quote, Vale was not Shalon. Her features were different enough that the two of them would be distinct individuals to anyone who happened to see them both. Still, Vale did bear the echoes of Shalon. She was a dark-eyed, tan-skinned, Alethi version of Shalon, a Shalon that was a few years older and had a pointier nose and chin, end quote. Vale's physical appearance is not completely unlike Shalon's, but significantly varies in the type of clothing worn and the way in which Vale carries herself. Quote, "She couldn't go like this, dressed as a light-eyed woman. She hurried to Tyne's trunk and dug through the clothing. A few minutes later, she stood in front of the mirror wearing a loose brown trousers, a white buttoned shirt, and a thin glove on her safe hand. She felt naked with her hand exposed like this. The trousers weren't so bad. Dark-eyed woman wore them when working on the plantation back home, though she had never seen a light-eyed lady in them. But that glove. She pulled on one of Tyne's white coats. The stiff thing went all the way down to the tops of her boots, and she tied it at the waist with a thick black hog's-hide belt, so that it was mostly closed in the front, as Tyne had wore it. It did look kind of silly, but then she felt everything about this outfit looked silly. A gloved hand, trousers. The coat had seemed imposing on Tyne. It indicated experience and a sense of personal style. When Shalon wore it, she looked like she was pretending. She saw through the illusion to the frightened girl from rural Jacaved," end quote. Shalon's illusion allows her the freedom to experience many facets of her character that would not be possible as a Vendan noblewoman. She finds freedom in the androgynous clothing that she wears as Vale, a disguise that allows her to go unnoticed in places. In contrast, her usual red hair, light eyes, and expensive clothing would have marked her as a target for thieves and kidnappers. Shalon's use of illusions give her power to fully be whoever she wants to be. Throughout the series, Yasna and Shalon use their appearance and adornment to navigate and thrive in situations. Sanderson's depictions and descriptions of dress don't just serve a function within the novels, they also allow the reader to innately understand the different facets of Sanderson's fictional world. As Kuhn states, while fashion may function as an integral part of realistic narration, clothing also carries the symbolic weight and the impact of additional connotations may be received on a subconscious level rather than a conscious level, end quote. She goes on to assert, quote, dress belongs to the social landscape, part communication, part performance, and part code. Clothing is so much of a part of the daily scenery that viewers may become insensitive to its meaningfulness. However, when we examine dress closely, it quickly becomes apparent that as a cultural representation, it conveys an entire network of associations. Dress can both document and challenge cultural codes, end quote. Sanderson is no exception, as he has consciously built a realistic world in which dress theory can be applied and analysis can be performed. Much like theater or film, fictional dress in writing is both an extension of society's own relationship with clothing, as well as an intentional performance of character. It is an extension and magnification of the expectation that dress signifies meaning and can be broken down into a code. Sanderson successfully uses dress as a tool to create personal identity, as well as cultural divisions, identify and challenge gender constructions, and subvert the idea of religiously imposed restrictions. Semiotic cues and social relationships as displayed through dress can be utilized subtly to communicate with the reader without detracting from the plot. Ingenuity on the author's part can quickly set up relationships and identities with a couple of sentences. While epic fantasy often calls for a strong focus on world-building details, Sanderson goes a step beyond to use dress as a means of commentary and characterization. He creates a fully realized world of his own creation while staying relatable to the reader. Dress is crucial in his goal of characterization and world building, and he effectively uses it to his advantage. Indeed, Sanderson exemplifies exceptional use of this technique in his novels and effectively communicates with his readers in a way that brings about a deeper understanding and a more profound experience. Thank you.